Thanks for joining us tonight. We're so glad you're here. And again, if you're just jumping in, go ahead and say hello, introduce yourself in the chat box, and let us know where you're tuning in from. We are just thrilled to have our second Ranchers Stewardship Alliance Rural Resilience webinar tonight with Brady Allred, Bill Milton, and Natalie Berkman. My name is Laura Nelson. I'm the project leader for Ranchers Stewardship Alliance. Again, I see a lot of familiar faces in here, but I see some new ones too. So I just want to take a couple minutes before we get started to introduce you to Ranchers Stewardship Alliance and let you know what we do and why we're here. So Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, our mission statement is ranching, conservation, and communities, a winning team. And that mission statement means an awful lot to us. Ranchers Stewardship Alliance began in about 2003 when a group of ranch families in South Phillips County, Montana came together in a time when they felt like they were facing a lot of challenges and a lot of pressures, and said, you know, if we're going to survive and we're going to be resilient and sustainable on this land, we've got to work together to create the future that we want to see. And that future to us means that ranchers are doing what they do best on the land. They're taking care of the land, the wildlife, the animals, and the communities in their care. And that all those things, when we work together with our partners in the conservation community, means a win-win-win for all of us. And so that's what we're here to do. And we know that education is a really important part of that ambition, that when we learn together, we grow together. And when we learn together, we can make our businesses and our landscapes and our communities stronger. So that's why we're here. We're so glad to have you. We have several of our RSA board members in the audience today, and we hope you'll get to meet them and visit with them when we go into the breakout room. So with that, I want to just again say welcome. We've had a few more people join. Say hello, tell us who you are and where you're joining from in the chat box. And I'll lay down some ground rules for tonight. We are so thrilled to have this lineup of speakers tonight, and we want this to be a very interactive event. Again, when we talk about learning together, that means we're learning from each other and with each other. So while we do ask that you stay muted throughout the evening's presentation, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. So please do use the chat box. Use that throughout the evening to make comments, ask questions. I'll be monitoring that, and I'll take your questions and use that for the Q&A later tonight. So please, as Bill and Brady and Natalie are talking, if you hear something or have a thought or a comment or a resource that you want to share, a book that you've read pertaining to that subject, throw it in the chat box and we'll record that. That's super helpful. So it will be an interactive event. We want you to know that we will go into breakout rooms about halfway through the presentation where you guys will get a visit with each other and kind of digest that information that first Brady shared and then that Bill and Natalie shared. So we want you to be ready for that, be ready to come off of mute and visit with our fellow guests. We are able to provide these webinars for free thanks to support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And so we just wanted to recognize them and appreciate their support, and also say if you enjoy these webinars and want to see them continue into the future, you can support Ranchers Stewardship Alliance as well. And Angel will have a link in the chat box there to tell you a little bit more. So with that, I am going to go ahead and introduce our guests, our speakers, and hand it over to them. Brady Allred is a professor of rangeland ecology and architect of the Rangeland Analysis Platform in the W.A. Frank College of Forestry and Conservation at the University of Montana. He works to advance rangeland conservation and management by focusing on rangeland dynamics, processes, and structure at broad scales. Bill Milton and his wife Dana run 500 Angus cow-calf pairs on 15,000 acres of rolling prairie in central Montana. As stewards of the land, they continue to work towards returning the land to the original native grass. And Bill has used the Rangeland Analysis Platform extensively to advance his grazing management and landscape management. And Natalie Berkman spent 2 years apprenticing with Bill and Dana through the Quivira Coalition's new agrarian program. Natalie grew up in Washington, D.C. She moved to Colorado for college, where she became grounded in agriculture. She spent a few years working on and managing small-scale vegetable farms before moving from Gunnison, Colorado to Montana in 2019. She made the switch from growing turnips to growing beef and feels like she's finally found her home on Montana's rangeland. She currently works as the livestock manager at Oxbow Cattle Company in Missoula, Montana. So with that, I just want to say welcome and thank you to Brady and Bill and Natalie for being with us tonight. And I'm going to hand it over to Brady.
Wonderful. Thank you, Laura. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. This is looks like a fantastic group. I'm really excited to talk tonight alongside Bill and Natalie. I think we'll have some great discussion, some great interaction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully this will work. If you're not seeing my slides, someone let me know. So I'll just assume you are. There we go. Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk about the Rangeland analysis platform, which many of you have probably heard of in some degree or form or fashion. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about explaining what it is and maybe a little bit how to use it if we have some time. And then it'll be great to hear from Bill and Natalie to see how they're combining this wonderful technology with the on-the-ground data and the monitoring that they do on their place. And so real quickly, I also want to thank some colleagues here at the University of Montana. I should have put their pictures up here. Many of you know Dr. David Noggle. He's been a longtime friend of many people in this group, a good friend of mine and good colleague who helped me build this, as well as Matthew Jones, Dr. Matthew Jones here at the University of Montana. So some great colleagues. I have the opportunity to work with some great people. And I am not entirely responsible for this, but I did lead it. And the secret to great work is surrounding yourself with great people. So the Rangeland Analysis Platform, or what is commonly referred to as the RAP now. I did not necessarily pick that acronym, but it sticks really well, and so I'll go with it. So what is the Rangeland Analysis Platform? It's actually two things, and I'm going to talk about both these things tonight. The first one is a group of data sets that we've built over the years. And these data sets are really kind of the core engine of the Rangeland Analysis Platform. They're the thing that actually makes it drive. And those data sets that I'll talk about are a rangeland cover data set, which measures percent aerial cover annually, and then a rangeland production data set, which is really a measure of rangeland forage, herbaceous forage, that is measured in pounds per acre. And that is available annually and at every 16 days as well. And because these data sets are very large and very massive, and because we wanted to serve them up so people could actually do something with them, so they're not just sitting here in our offices at the University of Montana, we also built what we call the Rangeland Analysis Platform, which is a web application, which can be found at the URL there at the bottom of the screen. And I'll share that in the chat later on. And I'll actually, if there's time, I'll give a demo of the Rangeland Analysis Platform so you can see how it works. So that's what the RAP is. The second question that I wanted to kind of pose tonight is why? Why did we build the Rangeland Analysis Platform? And the real answer as to why we built it is because the way we monitor rangelands, these methods that we use to monitor rangelands, they do not scale. And what I mean by that is that they weren't developed or made to monitor big areas. Now, the fact that they do not scale, that is perfectly okay. That's a good thing. They were never meant to scale. In fact, these methods were developed to give detailed pictures, detailed snapshots of different areas of the landscapes across different areas of the ranch, different pastures, different ranches, things like that. But they were never meant to cover large, big areas. Now, I've spent most of my life looking down at the ground, like these photographs here on the screen, and trying to identify plants and trying to monitor places. And so we thought it was important that every now and again, we actually pick our heads up and we look around, not just what's down at our boot, but what's happening around us. And in order to do that, we had to come up with a different method to monitor rangelands. Now, a lot of the times when I talk about the rangeland analysis platform, people put themselves in the shoes of Charlie Brown here. And they say, you know, it has to be one or the other. They'll say, you know, the on the ground methods work great, and we've been using them for a long time, and that's what I'm going to use. Or they'll say the on the ground methods don't work great, and they don't cover big areas, and so I'm going to use these bigger, broader methods that are used to give us a bigger picture. And what I want to say is, you know, what Bill and Natalie and myself, what we're going to talk about tonight is that it doesn't have to be an either or an or. And what it should really be a together, a synergy, because both these methods of collecting data and learning information about your land are really important. They both empower you with different perspectives. One, a very local perspective that is very important and critical when managing. And the other can empower you with a broader perspective that can be critical for not just managing big areas like the entire United States of America, but also managing places like your land or, you know, your pastures or your ranches or your allotments or anything else. Because what's happening on your neighbor's land and what's happening on the land around you is indicative of where you may be going. And so it's important to have that spatial perspective of what's going on around you. And it's also important to have that perspective through time. So I'm going to talk very, very briefly about the Rangeland Analysis Platform and how we built it. I'm going to skip over all the nitty-gritty details. If you have some questions, I can get into those later on. But what you need to know is that we combined on the ground information. We had about 75,000 plots of data that were collected on the ground. These were plots collected by the BLM through their assessment, inventory, and monitoring program, mostly entirely on public lands. These are plots that were collected through the NRCS, National Resources Inventory Program, the NRI, which occurs entirely on private lands, as well as plots collected by the National Park Service on various National Park Service lands across the West. And so we combined those 75,000 plots with satellite imagery that has been recorded and taken from the early 1980s. There's been satellites up in space for a long time, and they've been taking pictures of the Earth for a long time. And so we combine those two, and with the power of cloud computing, we're able to produce maps and data of rangeland vegetation across the entire United States. And these data sets, specifically the two core data sets that we focus on, our first one is vegetation cover, and we provide estimates of aerial cover for 5 functional groups: perennial forbs and grasses, annual forbs and grasses, trees, shrubs, and bare ground. So we have these 5 different vegetation classes, and we provide a continuous estimate of cover. And by continuous, I mean ranging from 0 to 100%. And so it doesn't necessarily say this is grass or this is shrub or trees, but it tells you how much grass cover is there, or how much shrub cover is there, or how much tree or bare ground cover is there. And these maps, these data sets are provided from, they start in 1986 and they go all the way up until last year, 2021. And we provide them at an annual time step. And so for the last 36 years, we're able to provide an estimate of annual cover across in the entire United States. And these data sets are also 30-meter resolution. Of course, as you know, pointy head academic scientists, we have to work in the metric system all the time. And so 30-meter resolution, what that is that's about the size of a baseball diamond, more or less. And so we have an estimate of the, for example, the perennial forb and grass cover of the size of a baseball diamond across the entire United States. And so if you were to add up all the baseball diamonds that would fit across the United States, it's a lot. I think when I used to do this, when we just had the Western United States, I would say 5 billion. So I'm just going to double that and say it's 10 billion. And so it's a lot of baseball diamonds that we have information for. Our second data set that we have is our vegetation production or rangeland production data set. And so what this provides is an estimate of rangeland production measured in kind of the common currency that we all work in, pounds per acre. And it accounts for the perennial forb and grass herbaceous production, the annual forb and grass herbaceous production, and then we also combine those two to provide a total estimate of herbaceous production. And so when we do these estimates, we exclude, we have our methodology allows us to exclude the trees and the shrubs and the bare ground and other things that may influence. And so we're just trying to estimate what that actual grass production is. Grass and forb production. And these data sets are also available annually starting from 1986 to present. But the neat thing about this data set is that it's also every 16 days. And so we can have a measurement, an estimate of grass production as it occurs throughout the growing season. And this is, again, starting back in the mid-'80s, all the way up into the present day. And actually, we also do it, in the current year. And so just last week, we were able to do our latest 16-day estimate, and we put that live. And so we can see things grow as they grow throughout the growing season. We can see the changes that occur within a season. And so this is really important because we can compare. We have information now to compare. How was this growing season, not just the total number, but how is, this year's growing season, how is it different from last year's growing season, or from that really bad drought year that we remember, or that really good wet year that we remember. And so we're able to provide information on comparisons for all those years. So this is my cue to kind of move over. I'm going to give a very, very brief kind of demonstration of the rangeland analysis platform. I don't want to take time away from Bill and Natalie. They're going to kind of show us how they're using this. And so I'm going to just kind of give a brief demonstration and walk you through it. And so if you go to this address, rangelands.app, it'll take you here. One thing I would encourage you to do, and I think Laura will put these in the chat later on, is we have this support page that you can click on. And we have a colleague here that has really made some fantastic support materials. There's articles, there's videos, there's tutorials, demonstrations on how to use it. And so you can really kind of, hopefully it works well and you can kind of self-teach yourself. If you go down here, we have a various different kind of apps and tools that we host on the Rangeland Analysis platform. The one that I'll demonstrate real quickly is the wrap itself. A few others that you might want to check out that I'd encourage you to check out is actually this Production Explorer, which kind of gives a more detailed comparison of rangeland production on the specific area that you're interested in. And then also at the bottom here, this historical imagery app that can provide historical imagery for the state of Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho going all the way back to the 1940s. And so you can see what your place may have looked like 80 years ago or so. And so I realize I'm about to cut into Bill and Natalie's time, so I'm going to be very quick. If you click on the wrap here, what you'll get is a map of the data sets. It visualizes the data sets. We're looking at our rangeland cover data sets. You can turn data sets on and off. Now we're looking at our rangeland biomass, our herbaceous biomass, or rangeland production data set. This is built on top of Google Maps, and so it should be kind of hopefully intuitive and familiar. You can turn satellite imagery on and off, and so you can kind of zoom in to your specific area or your spot, and you can see how something may look. One thing I want to be able to demonstrate is we have the ability to analyze specific areas. And I'm going to look at an allotment that I believe Bill uses. We've used this a lot in demonstrations. And so I have, I'll just turn this off so you can see it better. We have this allotment here, and what you do is you can load a file or you can draw a polygon, and I can maybe demonstrate that after Bill and Natalie speak. And you just click on this, and it will go out and talk to our servers that we pay to use in Silicon Valley, and it will calculate the average cover and the average biomass for this entire polygon. And it will give that information through time, starting in 1986 to present. And so what we're looking at here is annual cover for our 5 different functional groups, as well as an estimate of annual production. If we click over here, I'm sorry, those blue bars were estimates of annual precipitation, rainfall. If we click over here, you'll see our estimates of rangeland production or annual biomass from 1986 to present, and we can see that things are trending up in this particular case on this allotment. And then on this tab, you can click on our 16-day biomass, and you can see seasonal dynamics. Of course, not much is happening right now at this time of the year, but we can look at past years and we can see how production has varied throughout the year. One real quick tip is that if you want to look at this data more closely, you can click on that button and it will blow it up for you so you can kind of zoom in. And I'll be able to answer questions afterwards, and I'll be able to stay online afterwards if there are specific questions. Lastly, before we go into our breakout group session, Laura asked me to share a question that to kind of get us going. And this is my question I guess I would ask. How would you use comprehensive on-the-ground rangeland production data? So if you had rangeland production data for your land or for your operation that you had collected yourself throughout the years, let's say for the last 30 years, how would you use that? And so that's the question I would pose to you, and then we can talk about that in the breakout sessions.
Great, thank you, Brady. That was a quick but thorough overview of the platform. I appreciate it, and I hope that that gave you guys enough information to go off of to start thinking about. If you can see some of the things that Brady showed are available on the Rangeland Analysis platform, or things that you've gathered, rangeland production data that you've gathered yourself, how do you use that? And I hope that you'll hear from your peers how they use it as well.
Guess it would be helpful to get off mute, so I'm going to talk.
There you are.
So yeah, well, thanks RSA for inviting us to participate on this. This is a subject pretty dear to
Bill, you muted yourself.
Yes, okay. I'm trying not to touch anything. Anyway, happy to be here. It's great to have a good crowd. This has been a pretty important topic for our family ranch. But before we get into the details of what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and new projects we're working on related to monitoring, I wanted to provide a little context. I was at a soil symposium last week, and I think a lot of you probably are familiar with the 5 principles of soil health. But last week we heard another one, and I agreed with it. Anyway, those 5 principles cover the soil, minimize soil disturbance, increase diversity, maintain continuous living plants and roots, and integrate livestock. So Natalie and I are going to, but the 6th one is like context. So when you're trying to understand our place, if we don't give a little background and just talk about specific things we're doing, I don't think it'll be as meaningful. So I'm going to provide a little personal history of how I was sort of thrust into monitoring, and Natalie's getting a little history. But I'm going to start off with Natalie to give a little background of how she connected with us and what she learned and where she's at, and then I'll chip in, and then we'll move into the slides and talk more specifically about what we actually do. So Natalie, please.
Awesome. Yeah, Laura gave a great introduction for me, but I spent 2 years apprenticing through Kavira's new agrarian program with Bill and Dana Milton. And I finished that up this past December, and I now live in Missoula and work at Oxbow Cattle Company. But I still get to maintain this awesome relationship with Bill and Dana by doing fun stuff like this. And then I also do some technological consulting. I do our Maya grazing management software and update Bill's daily moves, and then help him with some other technology issues like opening files on his computer he can't open. So it's just a forever type of relationship, and I'm just really grateful to be able to be under his guidance and mentorship for the rest of my life. So yeah, we'll dive into some context of the ranch here.
Yes, So yeah, I'll give a little background here. And as you can tell by that slide, we do fairly high stock density at times. That's about 500 cows on about 3 acres. But this would be another whole topic. But Natalie's actually, with the apprenticeship program, the role of having extra people to move cattle is profound. And at some point, well, we share that. But anyway, I'm going to just talk about how I got into monitoring so early in my ranching career. So I'm going to read just one thing that I wrote today that kind of gets at the core of why I think this work is so important. And I usually don't read things too often, but I think I kind of captured this pretty well. I'm going to explore why monitoring is important and how we talk about the results of monitoring is even more important. I often reference this as a marriage of data and dialogue. Two sides of an inseparable coin, self-informing and self-governing. When the relationship between the two is adaptive, imaginative, respectful, and healthy, the sky is the limit. The sky is the limit to what you could do to use this information. When it is conflicted, disrespectful, misunderstood, manipulative, or unhealthy, you may wonder if there's even a sky at all. And I think we experience this in our culture today. And you know, my whole history has been one that's really been driven by collaboration, and monitoring has been a great opportunity to practice that. Just briefly, I showed up. My family showed up in Montana in 1956. My father bought a ranch, and the ranch I'm on is not that same ranch. He died fairly young. I was only on that ranch for about 12 years, but it was my very informative years of me getting a real contact with land and wildlife and animals. So I kind of bounced around and did a walkabout after that, and met my wife, spent some time in New Mexico, went to Montana State and also Berkeley. I mean, doesn't everybody go to Montana State and Berkeley as a co-college experience? And that's, in a sense, I want to share that because I did spend time in a Bay Area California culture and a time in a Montana culture, and that sort of informed my kind of openness about doing things differently. In the end, my wife and I arrived in Muscle County in 1978, and very green, having worked on some ranches. And we were young and thrown into making a ranch work in country we really weren't that familiar with. Having my father's ranch was over by Wolf Creek, Montana, more mountainous type country with running streams. But in the early 80s, I went to an Alan Savory class in New Mexico when they were like 7 days long. It was a pretty intensive experience. I went down with Steve and Jeannie Charter, good friends that ranch south of me. And that kind of blew my whole paradigm about what ranch or what grazing management could look like. So I came back from that very motivated. But as you look at the map here, that yellow stuff is BLM. 40% of our ground is public. And so to imagine building a complicated system like you're looking at with all those lines, developing water, moving animals differently, having a lot more flexibility, getting BLM to buy into this early on, like in the late 80s, early 90s, would probably be a pretty daunting task. Fortunately, we had a really great field guy from the Billings office that kind of trusted that we were really sincere about doing this, and we could probably do this and not trash the ground. And I think a lot of the senior people at BLM felt that by doing this, we would. But because we had to get BLM to agree to start doing some really different types of grazing, we had to agree this took about 3 years to develop this plan. We had to agree to have third-party monitoring to be able to document over time that what we were doing was in fact improving the landscape. So early on, and this is a really important point I'll make probably many times in the presentation, because a lot of people, and I kind of heard it at a webinar that I attended today with the Western Landowner Alliance on a similar subject. It's just why is I mean, even though monitoring is getting more popular and people are seeing the value of it, it's been really a slow journey for people to want to gather this information and be able to use it, and to be able to use it transparently with other people. So anyway, we were motivated early on that by being able to do monitoring, we could create some real value in our place. So with that, Natalie, and well, I just might show us, you're looking at our ranch right here. This is actually an updated new map. And one of our really important partners is NRCS. They've just been really great to work with. And in fact, when we did our first planning with BLM, we used a Great Plains Soil Conservation Service 10-year program. They don't have those anymore, but it was a wonderful program. And so they played a really important role in helping us build out the infrastructure to do this. But just to give a context of what we're trying to do, just really quickly, is there's 5 units in here. And with those 5 units, running our cattle and calving out in the summer, calving out, in early summer, and grazing throughout the winter, we only graze about 20% of our ranch during April through June, early July, only once every 5 years. So this flexibility that BLM afforded us has created some great opportunity to develop cover. So now let's go to the next one.
Okie doke. So this is a chart that I made. I think it's a good way to visually describe some changes on the ground that we're seeing due to our shifting management. So this blue line is our rainfall since 2012. It's mostly taken from our Messinet station that we have on the ranch, but also from Coco Ross, which is a pretty common way to get rainfall data. The red line is our average animal days per acre over the years. So it's just the amount of forage harvested. And then you can see in 2016 is when Bill really ramped up and those animal days started taking off. The purple line is pounds of perennial biomass, which is taken from the RAP data. And then the green line on the bottom there is carrying capacity of the ranch. So our grazing software, Maya Grazing, uses animal days per acre per inch of rainfall to quantify carrying capacity. And it's supposed to be relatively steady over time, but in 2020, you can see we're able to increase our carrying capacity. Which is great, but you're probably thinking like, well, what do your cows look like? And we'll get to that later. So Bill, if you want to add anything on this graph.
No, I think you captured that one pretty well.
Okay, so this, Brady showed a little snippet of this in his presentation. And so this is from the RAP, and it's the cover for the entire Milton Ranch in percentage. And so that top line is perennial forb and grass cover. And Bill, do you want to kind of talk about the drought in the early 2000s and how it correlates with?
So if you follow it over, you get to the late 90s, early 2000s into like 2005, you notice that our bare ground really starts going up again. That was about an 8-year drought period in which all those years rainfall was below average. And so you go up on top, you can see a correspondingly drop, in perennial and grass cover. I remember at the end of that drought, we actually had places where plants were just dying, especially on south slopes. So even under the best of situations, even though we weren't applying some of our best grazing principles at that point, weather is still a pretty dominant factor in our production. But we certainly can change it. But I think that the most important line here that we focus on, and in our breakout, we were talking with Jack Alexander, who's a range management consultant. The RAP does a really good job in identifying changes in bare ground. And for most of us who are doing intensive grazing, one of our biggest motivating factors is covering the ground. And so we are showing in this that we've had a pretty steady decrease, a little uptick in these last 2 years because of the drought. But that's a really important trend line that we really focus on. And one of the things that gave us confidence with the rangeland analysis program is that Roland Cruz, who's been a consultant, a range management consultant, has helped us. He was a third-party monitoring person when we got into the BLM program and changing our stuff. We found that his 12 plots that he has spaced out over the ranch corresponded pretty closely with what the remote sensing was showing us as well. So that was kind of a key trigger for me that to take a closer look and to use this. But the most valuable thing is just visually you can see over a large period of time what the trend lines are, and that's really important. I'll bring up one more thing here, because this program can even capture significant changes from year to year. If you go into where it's like 2018, you'll see that annuals take a precipitous climb, and that year, Eastern Montana looked like it was a monoculture of Japanese brome. Don't know why that happened. Don't know the combination of factors that led to that explosion. A lot of people were pretty freaked out. And you can see if you go up to the perennial stuff, there was a sort of a corresponding dip because of competition between the annuals and the perennials. And then very quickly, because the perennials were present in the landscape and the conditions that led to that changed, and we dropped back to a more normal trend line. There's another thing in here that there's another piece of drop on the perennial cover is following the year of Japanese brome, we had the year of clover, in which yellow sweet clover literally, I mean, Eastern Montana, for all practical purposes, seemed to be just a yellow ocean of clover. And the clover was so thick that when we were moving cattle, driving my little pickup, the clover was over the top of my pickup. And we were trying to lay out temporary wire in that kind of a situation. And being that thick, we had places where sagebrush actually died because of the competition, that just incredible sucking up of moisture that the clover did. And yeah, and a lot of perennials didn't express themselves, and particularly perennial forbs. The competition was just too intense. But that was just a one-year deal. And then the clover ended up creating amazing cover opportunities in the following year to get some litter laid down. So that's probably enough on that one.
Yeah, so actually this graph is a really good visual representation of that brome and then sweet clover spike. So this is just the total biomass for the entire ranch in pounds per acre. So you can see what Bill was talking about in 2018, this red line here, this crazy spike in Japanese brome with this correlating dip in the perennials. And then the sweet clover he was talking about are these two spikes. So that's kind of interesting to see how our on the ground observations are really seen here in this RAP data.
Yeah, I think we're good there. Oh, I just could add one thing. I might talk about birds a little bit later, but because the cover was so thick with that clover, if you're familiar with the Baird sparrow, which is one of the 4 key birds that that people are focusing on in terms of protecting grasslands in the Northern Plains, it was really obvious that that bird likes heavy cover, because we had more Baird sparrows that year than we've ever had before. In fact, they usually don't show up at the ranch because we're just a little bit drier site, but it just shows how dynamic the adaptations between animals and plants can be, and how those things can change from year to year. Okay, I'm good.
Okay. So this next graph is yet another cool graph from the Rangeland Analysis platform. It's actually from the Production Explorer tab. And so this shows our entire production on the ranch in pounds per acre since 1986. And then, so that's that black line, and then it's stacked up against percentiles of average. So you can see since around 2000, our production has been steadily above 100% average. And then another interesting thing on this graph is that in 2020, the worst drought on record, our production dipped pretty aggressively, but it's still above that 125% above average. And so it's just kind of an interesting way to represent the management decisions you're making on the ground. This Bill will talk a little bit about the pregnancy rate. So if you guys look at the condition of this cow, this photo is taken in June, and then guess which year this was taken.
Anyway, so we've been struggling a little bit, and I'll talk about this a little bit with when I talk a little bit about the Rangeland Monitoring Group, or a community approach to monitoring. You know, how do we align some production indicators that correlate with the efforts we're doing to improve cover and diversity on the land? I mean, you know, I say this sort of facetiously, anyone can take 1,000 yearlings and just do great impact work on a landscape. And if you really weren't that concerned about performance, you could still get some great performance on the ground. So because we're a family ranch, and because we have to pay our bills and to try and get a return on investment and make the ranch profitable over time, you know, pregnancy rates is a good indicator, but I wanted to highlight that this, as it's presented, is not a good indicator, because again, you don't know if I'm feeding 10 pounds of alfalfa every day to make sure my cows are conditioned. So without information that relates to the overall supplementation or forage access for your cattle, to use an indicator like this without that background data, I think would be very unuseful. I also wanted to identify, so Natalie came on in 2020, was here in 2021, and in 2020, you know, our pregnancy rate really dropped. It was a drop. The summer got really dry, and because Natalie was here, I mean, that's the only reason this happened, is because Natalie was here.
Yeah.
No, but Natalie and I were really excited about experimenting with moving animals more frequently, and taking more uniform cover. And actually, we made a mistake. We you know, it got dry on us. We were pushing our cattle a little too much. Our younger cattle were mixing with our older cattle. We only had one group, and we actually made a mistake here. And we learned a lot from that. But we just were pushing our cattle a little bit too much and not moving them when they were full. We were moving them when they were starting to get hungry. And the younger cattle, in particular, if they were starting, the main herd was starting to get hungry, the younger cattle were definitely. Then in 2021, which is actually a much more difficult year, you know, we kind of bounced up close to what our average is. We probably have a little bit lower or a higher pregnancy rate than some people, but this is kind of in the ballpark of what we're comfortable with. But in 2021, it bumped up a little bit, conditions which were much more difficult. But Natalie and I became a lot more skilled about when we moved animals and just observing animal behavior so that they didn't get hungry. But in 2021, we also used a little high protein alfalfa about 20 days before we put the bulls in, because we put the bulls in the end of July. So sometimes, yeah, just despite your best management of the grass, conditions may warrant that, you know, targeted supplementation might be a good investment. I think we milked that one. This doesn't show a lot other than to say that our ranch is involved with a community bird monitoring program that's tied with the Partners for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Marissa Sother and Kelsey Malloy, who we work with, have been really focusing on the importance of keeping grass and how it affects these four key birds in the Northern Plains. And so we agreed to begin a monitoring program, and we just don't have enough years under our belt to really show any trends, even though there can be some dramatic changes based on a year. But the point I'm making here that we also need to be looking at other things that we want to monitor on the landscape. And because we've been so willing to work with groups who are concerned about birds, which are also concerned about maintaining perennial landscapes, native landscapes, you know, it's really invited a lot of cool partnerships with people like Audubon, World Wildlife Fund, to name just two. And then with the working groups in our local communities like Winnet Aces and RSA, you know, this becomes information that the general public really wants to know. If they want to be comfortable that ranchers are good, or you know, are a good thing to have on these grasslands, both private and public, these are the kind of things that are important to the public, and they're important to me. I'm really into birds. They're a really important part of our enjoyment of the ranch. So this is just a call out that we, as ranchers, should be more open to monitoring some other kind of indicators that may be not directly related to our production and on our cow enterprise, but are sending a message and a story to others that we're concerned about all the things that live on our landscapes and not just the performance of our cattle. So there you go. Probably the next one. So we're gonna finish with this. You know, I was giving, like I said, I had to give a talk last week at the State Soil Symposium that the NRCS put on, and this question just sort of popped into my mind when I woke up about 2 days before. You know, is pastoralism still relevant in the 21st century? Basically, is grass-based agriculture going to be relevant? And the people who are responsible for doing that going to be relevant in the 21st century? I mean, everybody understands the kind of issues that we in agriculture face in terms of telling our story. And this sort of leads into why I and a few other ranchers have been working on, and I think Peter Donovan's on from the Soil Carbon Coalition. He's a big, important player in this, particularly looking at soils. But we feel that individual I mean, I have come to appreciate quite a while ago that just monitoring my own place is just not sufficient. I am so impacted by the larger landscape around me and how well my neighbors do, and how ranchers in our larger landscape do, that working collaboratively with them, agreeing to indicators we all think are important, involving a lot of different partners, NGOs, academics, science, ranchers, agencies, that this is a very motivating, important characteristic of why we need to monitor. And this quote, and Rick Coughlin kind of highlighted that he thought this was the most important quote that came out of a brainstorming session with a group of ranchers who are working on this pilot program in Garfield and Muscle County and Petroleum County. So we build trust with the outside world with open candor and open reflection, not afraid to share what is working and what is not. We're not afraid to tell those stories of how we failed. If we hide everything, we'll create distrust. We'll have some naysayers. We pay attention to what they're saying. If we listen to them, they'll listen to us. And then I go on, this next one was one of mine, just how can the practice of collaboration among very diverse stakeholders leverage their difference, their intention and imagination to actualize the best possible outcome. So I won't have a whole lot of time in the breakouts and in the question and answer. I can get into more detail on the rangeland monitoring group, but the fundamental motivation of this pilot program is how you co-design a large landscape monitoring program by having everybody who's interested in that landscape play a role in owning what that co-design program is going to look like. And if they own into the co-design of that program, then whatever comes out of it will also be owned. And so I'm really excited about doing this because it allows us to tell a story about communities, about rural landscapes, you know, about cultures that are working together and they're working interdependently with the landscape they're on. And so this to me is, for the future, is the exciting thing to look forward to. Some of you may not know that right as we speak, you know, there's some legislation called the North American Grassland Conservation Act that may actually be put, you know, might actually come up and be submitted as a bill in Congress here in the next few months. And then there's also this really large initiative called the Grassland Roadmap, which is basically a very diverse group of people recognizing the loss of upland birds in the northern and southern Great Plains, including Canada and Mexico, is a really threatened bioregion. And so there's this, over the last 2 or 3 years, this group of people have been working on, you know, how do you protect 500 million acres? How do you go about protecting a bioregion? And so the idea of having networks of local landscapes scattered over that vast grassland, networking with each other is sort of my vision of how we actually create an appreciation and a trust and a strategy for making sure that the people that live in that bioregion can actually nurture and cultivate protecting that bioregion together. So monitoring is going to play a huge role in being able to convey a credible story that in fact we are taking care of this ground. So I'm going to stop there. I don't know if I forgot to actually set up my timer, but I think I've gone long enough. Hopefully this will generate some questions for both Natalie and I and Brady, and I appreciate your attention. And thank you, Natalie, for your help.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Bill and Natalie. We're going to put you guys back into a breakout room. This one's going to be a little bit shorter. It's going to be about 7 minutes. And Bill and Natalie had posed a question to go into this next round of discussion, and that is, are there merits for creating a community-based approach for monitoring the health of a local landscape? And I guess I would just tie that back to Brady's comment early in the evening, that's when he said what's happening on your neighbor's land may be indicative of what's coming for you. And so Bill's question is to the point of what merits are there of community-based approach to monitoring the health of a local landscape. So again, this is going to be a really short one. We're going to go back into those breakout rooms, then we'll come back for an open Q&A for Bill, Natalie, and Brady all together. So Angel, go ahead with the breakout rooms, and as you come back, be ready for Q&A time. So we did have one question early in the evening that I just want to go to Natalie before I lose it in the chat box, because it was just a pointed question. Natalie, what is the tool that you use to calculate carrying capacity? Where'd Natalie go? Is she back with us?
Yeah.
There you are. Yeah.
So that was just from the Maya grazing software that Bill uses as his grazing management software. And they use animal days per acre per inch of rainfall as a carrying capacity measurement. And they have some articles and information on that on their website that they can probably do a pretty good job explaining why they use that metric.
And Natalie, maybe you could just expand a little bit more on how the Maya grazing software that you guys use kind of, how does that weave together with the rangeland analysis platform data? How do you use those two things together, and would it work as well as it has for you if those entities were separate? or if you didn't have the Maya grazing software?
Yeah, so I definitely look at them as pretty separate tools for our grazing management. Like I see the data and the graphs that RAP gives us as kind of like our scorecard or like our grade on how we grazed, like seeing that upward trend line. And then we use the software, as I'm sure a lot of ranchers just use an Excel sheet or write it down, which is awesome. Just for all the different partners Bill works with, like having a one place where a bunch of different people can access all that grazing information is pretty helpful. So we just use that to keep track of daily moves, and then how many animal days. That's Bill's biggest metric, how many animal days per acre we're taking from either like a 300 acre permanent paddock or one of those five sections. This one of the sections basically has 5 sections. So looking at just keeping track of our grazing management in one place, and then recording the day-to-day moves, where RAP is like, okay, so you did all those day-to-day moves, and Maya's showing that you got like 35 animal days per acre average this year, and that's why that trend line is going uphill. And then someone said, do you think Maya is worth the money? I would probably turn to Bill on that one.
As long as you have someone like Natalie to make sure you know how to use it.
Yeah, it's extremely complicated. I'm not going to lie. I'm not the most technologically savvy person. I'm just a millennial person, and it's pretty hard for me to figure out. But I've mastered it through a lot of time and error, lots of error, lots of calls with the IT people in Australia.
So one important element you sort of captured, but I just want to sort of bring it home, is that it's really important for us to archive the history of grazing over a long period of time in different parts of the ranch. And so Maya has sort of a functional way to do that, because we just didn't do that very well with our old school way of keeping records.
Mm-hmm. Bill, Natalie, and Brady, maybe all three of you will have a comment on this. I noticed several comments from breakout rooms and then a more pointed question here. You know, we looked at a lot of data that's looking behind you, what happened, and you're looking at the monitoring information from what's already happened. How are you using that to forecast into the future then and adapt your management as you move into the future? And one example is, how could you use it for drought planning? But maybe you have some other comments on some broader management ideas that you're pulling from the data that you get as you look behind you.
Let's see, shall I start? So the data, the feedback loop, I mean, and what this really is how to use data, not only internally on your own ranch, but with others, to sort of improve and advance the feedback loop of shared information, so that you're getting more signals of what actually is consistently improving your situation. So when we're thinking, looking back is telling us that the practices we are employing are creating a positive benefit, a positive trend line in terms of cover, less bare ground, more water infiltration. And these are particularly important things to trend in a positive way, particularly to mitigate drought. So we're getting a positive feedback from this trend line. And then, you know, when I went to the soil symposium, I started to really start to fully understand how the microbiome worked and how collaborative and connected all those things under the ground are doing. And, you know, so a lot of people think we kind of move a little bit more than necessary, maybe a little ridiculous, because we move almost every day. But so I came over to the soil symposium and looking at all this stuff and hearing from some people smarter than me. And so last week I've been moving twice a day. And I'm proud, who knows? There's this wonderful rancher in New Mexico in the Chihuahua Desert. Guy is off the charts. He's 28. He's a little bit like Cooper Hibbert, but even off the charts of Cooper, who really does pretty intense grazing. This guy is running about 1,000 cattle, and not during calving season or breeding season, but 8 months out of the year, he's moving 1,000 animals using interns 5 or 6 times a day. And he's out in a 10 to 13 inch rainfall zone. And it's looking pretty impressive. So people are kind of getting that, you know, a strategic use of stock density and strategic understanding of recovery can really start turning the dial in terms of improving the soil capacity to again support forage production. So yeah, it's going both ways, Laura, but when you're getting positive feedback, you tend to do more of it.
Good point, Bill. Natalie, Brady, anything to add there?
I guess I would add, you know, a lot of people think that data or maps are going to solve the problem or give you an answer. But data or maps, they just provide information, right? And it's how you use that information. And so I get a lot of people asking me, they think that, oh, we need to make a map of this or a map of that. But it's really how you use it. And it sounds obvious once we say it, but we have to sometimes remind people that, you know, the maps themselves are just there to fit into a plan or to fit into a workflow or a decision-making framework. And so to the specific question about, you know, planning for drought and things, the Rangeland Analysis platform provides a nice historical perspective. And so you can go back, and we all know those bad years and those good years. And I didn't have the chance or the time to highlight it, but I'd encourage you to take a look at the Production Explorer tool, because that really, it shows the data. It's the same data, the exact same data actually, but it shows it in a slightly different manner and is a little bit more easier to digest and kind of consume and understand. And you can compare this year to previous years and see how things are trending. And you can say, what did I do during that year? Or let me go back and check, or how did I respond? Or how did that year turn out? You know, if we hadn't gotten any rain by, you know, June 5th or whatever, is that an important date? And so it's how you use the information. It's not, there's an abundance of information out there, but it's really making a plan and a framework, a decision framework or something to how are you going to use that information.
Brady, and I think you're going to kind of expand on that a little bit more, but I want to read this last question for you. Do you have suggestions for simple on-the-ground methods, low cost, low time input that might be helpful to validate or interpret how the Rangeland Analysis platform output relates to conditions on the ground? How to validate or interpret that data and make good use of it?
Yeah, and so a lot of people have, you know, spoke very highly of the Rangeland Analysis platform tonight, and that's great. I've been on these presentations where they haven't spoke highly of it, and they said, you know, it doesn't work or it's wrong in this area, and that's great too. And I guess my point is, we always encourage people to use it alongside their local knowledge, right? And their local data that they've collected themselves, or just their expert knowledge of their system. You guys have been on your land and your operation for many, many years, and you have an intimate knowledge. And, you know, by no means is any of this data supposed to replace that. It's supposed to work in tandem. Sometimes it will work really good and you know, be accurate, and we hope that's most of the time. Other times it doesn't, you know, it messes up. There are sometimes errors, and I'm not going to shy away from that. It's not perfect. But, you know, comparing it to any local data that you've collected would be fantastic. I think the specific question, on the ground, low cost time on the ground methods. Just one thing that immediately comes to mind, my good friend Jeff Herrick with the Agricultural Research Service in New Mexico has developed an app called Land PKS. And that allows you to, it kind of walks you through and allows you to very easily collect data on your place. And that'd be a great place to start, actually. And it stores it on your phone, and it's very simple methods. I'd also encourage you, you know, reach out to, you know, Montana State Extension or to, you know, your local NRCS field office, and they will be very willing to help to set up a monitoring program.
Thanks, Brady. Guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap up in the next couple of minutes. So if you do have questions, please don't be shy. Put them in the chat box and get those into us so we can share them with Bill and Natalie and Brady. I'm curious, and Bill, you've had experience with this as well, but Brady, you've worked with a lot of producers who have been using this rangeland analysis platform. Tell me about some of the surprises maybe that folks have encountered or things that they've seen as they've interpreted this long-term historic data that has, again, maybe surprised or been an aha moment or a revelation that said, oh, I thought this was happening, but this data tells me this, or this is a curious thing. What are some of those surprises that you guys have encountered with other ranchers and users of the program?
Yeah, two things come to mind immediately. And the first is kind of what Bill talked about when he was speaking, in that a lot of the times, you know, we might not get the exact number right on the estimate of the production or the cover, but a lot of the times we get that trend right. And so we hear time and time again that the trend is actually very, very helpful. And it can show how things are trending through time. You know, it shows the impacts of a drought or the change in management. And so, yeah, that's commonly said. I talked about this in the breakout room, and I'll bring it up again. The one surprise we hear a lot, and we're hearing more and more, is the increase of trees in different areas. And especially, you know, here in the Northern Great Plains, and then as you go further east and then south, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, people are really surprised how much trees are increasing on their land. And it's like, someone made the comment of watching your kid grows. And so it's something that happens really slow. And so we get that a lot, that people are surprised. I'm losing a lot of my land to trees. And as you guys know, not much grows underneath those trees once they start filling in, and it removes the production.
And I'd share some very local numbers on an example we had of that. For those of you in Phillips County, it's not like we have a lot of trees. I think you could count them all in 2 days. But one place in the Larb Hills that actually has some conifer issues had a 5% increase in ground cover and trees in 10 years. And when it went through that yield gap analysis that you can do in RAP, it showed that a loss of almost 300 pounds to the acre of production over the last 10 years was taken up by trees, basically covering ground. So that's a huge example of where this can show a difference.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just say here at closing, we like to call it the green glacier because it moves very slowly and it kind of takes over the land.
Yeah. Brady, one more practical technical question. Somebody asked, how or where do I make a shapefile for my land, or directions of where to look? I know you guys have a great like Q&A videos, those kinds of things. Maybe this is a quick question to answer, but also please point us in the direction of those resources.
Yeah, I think I don't have it at hand. I'll email you, Laura, and you can maybe distribute something to the group.
Yes.
We commonly use shapefiles. They're kind of in the scientific world. They're a very commonly used format. Unfortunately, they're a little bit esoteric and a lot of people don't have them. And so one of the things I didn't demonstrate is you can actually draw your own polygon and kind of trace out your pasture on the RAP application itself, the one that I demonstrated. And in the Production Explorer, we also have the ability to use what's called KML files. And those files are very commonly used in, say, Google Earth, the program that kind of allows you to view imagery and things. And so the Production Explorer allows you to use KML files as well as to draw your own polygon.
Thanks, Brady. And we will send out some of these resources, folks, the Land PKS, we'll send out a link to that. If you have other questions or specific questions like that, send those to me and I'll send them back to Brady or Bill or Natalie, and we can send those resources back out to the rest of the group. So any final questions here? I don't want to close down discussion. I see things going on in the chat room, but I want to make sure I'm not missing. Oh, Brooke, thanks for asking that question. For on-the-ground ranch level or for cooperative monitoring, who would gather and analyze and share the data, and how would they do that? Is that a question to Bill and Natalie and the idea of collaborative landscape?
Yeah.
Is that
I'll take
okay?
that.
Bill, you want to take that? Okay. Who and how are we gathering data?
So, see, the beauty of community landscape. I mean, so often monitoring, like, maybe, and actually our BLM field rep Shane, he may have left, but he was on there. Often you'll have agencies create the monitoring program that a permittee has to use, or an NGO might decide. What the community-based monitoring process that we're developing is a co-designed process in which the ranchers and the agencies and everyone else involved is actually agreeing on what's going to be measured, how it's going to be measured, how it's going to be shared, what platform will it be on, how transparent we want to be with it. And it's an evolving process. But the key here is the ranchers are on equal level with everyone else that has an interest in these grasslands in terms of designing something that has a mutual positive feedback to everyone who's interested in the resource. So I think the beauty of this process, it's quite collaborative, and which makes it go a little bit slower. We've been working on this for like 6 years. But when you get it right, it's usually right because you just kind of grind through it with everybody who's involved. So yeah, there's not that many of these around. I did learn earlier today that there actually is about 20 groups around the West that are trying to do some kind of local-based monitoring.
Nice, thanks, Bill. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. Thank you for great questions, great discussion. Sounds like the breakout rooms went really well. Thank you, Bill and Natalie and Brady. If we can give them a virtual round of applause. We appreciate you guys very, very much. Again, if you have additional questions, we're putting in some contact information in the chat box. We're also putting in the post-event survey, and we would ask that link is in the chat box right now. I'll also share it in a follow-up email, but we do ask that you fill that out. Last year we got feedback after the one that we hosted with Leo Barthelmess and Todd Parker events that folks really enjoyed that kind of like bringing in the technical side and then the on-the-ground producer side. And so we very specifically took that feedback and created tonight's event because of feedback that we got from you guys that said that's what we really like. So we appreciate your feedback on those surveys, and we do use it to continue to make these webinars and events better. So please do grab that survey link and fill it out. We've got some other links and some contact information for Bill there in the chat box. So again, we just want to say thank you. We appreciate all three of you, and we appreciate each one of you who chose to spend your time tonight learning and growing and improving your ranches, because we know that every time one of us in our community succeeds, the whole community succeeds as well. So thank you. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next month. We have we have 2 more rural resilience webinars. So 3rd Thursday of the month. We'll see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.